Overcoming Obstacles, 3 Fatal Mistakes. Hi, I'm Ann Sullivan, and I'm so glad that you're watching this video, 3 Fatal Mistakes, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm not going to just tell you about these mistakes. I'm going to give you the system that you need to avoid them and to correct them if you're already making them. And so let's get right into this material. First of all, you can be making these mistakes even if you are a dedicated practicer, you have a regular practice schedule and you love to practice and you do it all the time. Even if you're an experienced harpist, even if you're a harpist at any level who's just really determined to succeed, all of these people can still make these mistakes. In fact, I do them from time to time. But what I'm going to talk with you about today is the system that I use for everything related to my practice and performance. It's the system that I discovered really worked for me when I was in kind of a tough spot. And it's my system for correcting and avoiding the kinds of mistakes that I'm going to talk about, the kinds of things that just are the obstacles in your way to good playing. So let's get on with them. Here's the first mistake. The first mistake is trying to do too much. Has this ever happened to you? I know it's happened to me. We want to play too many pieces, or we have too many commitments. We're trying to work on everything at once, trying to do technique and repertoire and everything just all at once. We have kind of a lack of focus just because everything is in front of us. We have just too much on our plate. And we love it. We don't want to leave any of it behind, but it's just too much to do. Now, the second mistake is almost the opposite. I call it pinpoint perfectionism. And it's when you've been concentrating on one particular thing for so long. It might be a hard spot in a piece. It might be a particular aspect of your technique. But you've been focusing on it so dedicatedly with so much intensity for so long that you really lose your vision of the bigger picture. You lose sight of the music you're trying to play. You sort of get yourself in this endless loop of correction. It's kind of like you just don't know when to stop fixing it. So that can be a really critical mistake too. And the third mistake we're going to talk about today is not having a plan that ensures your growth. You're playing, you're practicing, you're doing what seems like all the right things, but you really are going around in circles. Because when you don't have a particular direction and a particular plan to really develop the skills you need to grow and make progress, then you don't really get where you want to go. You sort of get ahead, but it's not really directed and it's not very efficient or very speedy. Because after all, having a plan is really a big part of this whole picture. In fact, when you have a plan, you know when you get there, right? If you don't have a plan, if you don't have a destination in mind, it's really hard to know if you've actually gotten where you want to go. But when you have a plan, you get to measure your progress. You get to see what's going on every day. You get to keep track of it. So this is a really key component of any good practice strategy. So here are 3 mistakes: trying to do too much, pinpoint perfectionism, and lack of a plan for growth. Now, you may not be doing any of these, but if you're like me, you've done at least one of them at least once. And if you're really like me, you've done all of them at some point or another. And so it really is helpful to know when you get there that people have been there before. And you can get yourself unstuck. You can get yourself past this. You just need to know what to do, which is why we're going to talk system, my system for dealing with these kinds of problems. Now, I know system doesn't sound very creative. It doesn't sound very musical. But what it is it's the framework to accomplish what you want to do. A system is a proven path. Right? People have been down this way before, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. People always say, system is comfort. Well, it is, because when you know that a system works, you can apply it and you have the confidence to know that it's going to work for you too. So that's what I want to give you. I want to be able to show you how to get that confidence for yourself. And I'd like to start with this question. Do you know how to practice? Now, I know you sit down and you play this and you do this and you do this and you watch for this and you try to correct these things. But do you really know what are the right things to spend time on? Do you know how to set a pace for your learning? Do you know the ingredients of a proper plan? This is step 1 in my system. Step 1 is proper practice. It's the first of 3 steps that I think are essential if you really want to not only make progress, but to stay on track to continue growing and developing as a harpist. Now, I'll tell you how I figured this out for the first time. It was actually when I was a young adult student, and I realized that something was different. When I was a kid, I started music lessons really young, and when I was a kid, every week I'd go for my lesson and my teacher would tell me what to do. Okay, go home, do this, hands separately, do this 3 times, do this 10 times, have it this, have it this, have it this, do this, do this, do this. And that would be my weekly chore. And then I'd go back for my next lesson and I'd get the next steps. But that didn't work once I became a college student. And especially once I became, a real grown-up out on my own, I had to figure something out. What I had to do was learn to make this transition between just doing what my teacher said every week and starting to practice as if she were right there with me, so that every day in my practice, I was correcting myself the way she would have corrected me. I was doing what she would have told me to do if she had been there. And that was a big transition for me. This is a transition that older students, adult students of any level, get stuck in, especially if they've taken lessons as a kid, because they don't know how to make this transition. They're using their old learning habits, and maybe this has happened to you because that's what happened to me, right? You're using those learning habits that you had as a child, but that doesn't really work so well as an adult, and it really slows you down. In fact, this is something that I work on with my younger students. We get to a point where they're someplace in, late middle school, early high school, where I start having them take the responsibility for their own practice, and I teach them how to make that transition because it's so important. And what happens is when you do that, when you start working this way, your practice becomes an actual progress booster, a progress accelerator, because now you're not just making practice from lesson to lesson, but you're making practice in each and every, or you're making progress rather, in each and every practice session. You're moving along every time you practice because you're always watching and listening and evaluating and thinking, okay, what should I be fixing with that sort of teacher ear? So that's the essence of proper practice. And let me give you the 3 key elements to this, because there really are 3 things that if you get these 3 in line and then you practice with the kind of intention I was just talking about, you're going to be in really good shape. So here they are. The first one is time. Now, obviously, you have to have time to practice, so you want to set aside enough time to do it. And really think about the time you practice as honoring your commitment to yourself. You've made a big commitment in terms of just committing to the instrument and time to practice, and you really want to play. So your time and the time you spend practicing is honoring your commitment to that dream, to that goal. So you really want to use it well. And this is not just about, doing an hour a day or 3 hours a day or an hour every week or whatever it is you want to do. But it's about setting aside the time, being sure that your schedule is reasonably consistent, that whatever schedule you set for yourself, whatever works in your life, you kind of stick with it as much as you are able. I mean, life throws curveballs at us, right? And that the time you spend at the harp is really focused on playing the harp and not distracted by other things. And that in your practice, your efforts are really directed to the things that are going to make you move forward, right? Going to get you progress. And that comes back again to, practicing as if your teacher were there with you. So here are those 3 elements again. Your time needs to be consistent. As I said, it doesn't have to be a rigid schedule and it doesn't have to be hours a day. It just has to be reasonably consistent. because then you can set realistic goals. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so your time has to be consistent. It has to be dedicated, no trying to multitask while you're practicing. And it has to be directed toward the results that you want to get. Okay, key element number 2, you ready? Focus. All right, yes, we want to focus, but this isn't just about paying attention in your practice and concentrating. It's about other things as well, because focusing your attention on what you're doing, while it's a big part of what you do, isn't the only part of what you should be focusing on. So here are the 3 things I suggest. I suggest that you focus your plan, right? This comes back to knowing really what it is you want to do. And this is part of what I helped you with in that 90-day plan, or I hope you printed that out, because that's part of this too. Decide what you want to accomplish and make a plan for doing it, step-by-step kind of plan. So you want to focus that plan, because that allows you to focus your attention as you practice on what really needs to happen to move your plan forward. Aha! So now you know exactly what to practice because you know the results that you want. And then be sure to track your work. Generations of musicians have been using practice journals or diaries or legal pads or post-it notes or whatever to track the work that they do in their practice. And that's because it's important. It comes back to that old maxim, what you measure, you move, right? What you keep track of, you make progress in, because you're paying attention to that. You're focusing on it every time you write in that journal or on that legal pad or whatever. So it doesn't matter to me the system that you use for tracking your work, but I will tell you that if you track it, if you write it down and are purposeful about what you're trying to do, you will get wherever you want to go faster. It works that way. Sort of, easy. Okay? And our third element, priorities. Priorities comes back to a plan again, right? In the 90-day plan, I talk about the 90-day goals and then the monthly progress goals and the weekly benchmarks. And that's really the way that it's easiest to think about your practice, to have those kind of goals and to organize them that way. Now here I talk about them a little bit differently. I talk about long-term vision. Now don't get confused. Sometimes people think about long-term vision in terms of, someday I want to play the Debussy dances, for instance, But if that's a dream piece for you and it's not on the horizon, sort of a 90-day horizon, if that's years distant in the future, that's a wonderful dream and it's a wonderful goal, but you can't set yourself out on a 5-year path because your energy, your dedication, your focus won't last. Not if you're human like the rest of us. We have, a limited capacity for focus. Some of us are better at it than others, but still 90 days is just about the right length of time for everybody. We can hold it together for 3 months. And then we just need to, sort of mentally shake ourselves up and readjust and, make a new plan. So if you have a 5-year goal like that or a 5-year dream, let's break that down. What's the first 90 days like? What has to happen? Well, maybe the first 90 days for you is getting used to the pedals. Maybe you don't have enough pedal facility to play the Debussy dances, so that's going to be a goal. So there's something that will work you toward your eventual dream goal, but in 90 days, you can make a lot of progress on those pedals. So set yourself a specific pedal goal for 90 days and make that your long-term vision. 90 days is long enough term, trust me. Then break that out into 3 monthly progress goals. Well, the third monthly progress goal will be your 90-day goal, right? But what are the 2 interim steps that you can use to make sure you're making progress on the way? And then break those out. Those are your short-term goals. Then break those out into weekly benchmarks, or I have daily benchmarks here. Same thing. It's what gives your daily practice focus, right? So that, okay, if I want to be here at the end of 30 days, what do I have to do today to move toward that goal? So that's what priorities will do for you. All right, so those 3 key elements of proper practice, time and focus and priorities. you see how this system comes together? This is just the first step of the system, but here it is. And you can see how this will help you move forward. But let me show you how these three things, how the proper practice aspect of this will help you correct or avoid the kinds of mistakes that we were talking about a minute ago. Are you doing too much, right? You have too much on your plate. Is that your biggest obstacle at the moment? Well, set your priorities. What's the most important thing for you to do right now? What's the biggest task that you have in front of you with your practice? What's the first thing that has to be done? Whatever it is, set that as a priority. This is the way a lot of people's practice looks, right? See, it's a big jumble of notes, right? So you've got scales to do, maybe in arpeggios. You've got an etude. You've got a piece to review. You've got a piece you want to learn for a performance. You've got an orchestra part or an ensemble part. So you've got all these things. And plus you have a regular life. So you don't necessarily have hours to devote to your practice. You still have to get it done. What you need to do is to pick a priority. What's the most important thing right now, this week? Well, and maybe if today is Tuesday and your orchestra rehearsal is on Thursday and you haven't looked at that part yet, maybe that's the priority, right? Whatever it is, choose one thing to make that a priority and put that in the right place. So let me give you a few ways that you can work with priorities in your practice. Now, this is not a 3-step system right here. These are 3 options for prioritizing your practice. You can put your pieces, the things you have to practice, in an order, right? So that maybe you want to do your warm-up exercises like scales or something first, and then the very next thing, you're going to do that highest priority thing, like the orchestra part I just talked about. Maybe that's coming up really soon and you need to get that done and you've been putting off practicing it. It's living at the back of the pile on your music stand. So make that your priority and do that right at the beginning of your practice so that you're prioritizing your practice by putting the pieces in a particular order and practicing them in that order. Or, and this is one of my favorite ones, number 2, rotate. You can rotate your pieces. What I often do, especially when I have a lot of music to do, much more music than I could practice in one practice session, I put it all in an order on my music stand. And then I practice the way I would like to practice, and I get through as much of that as I can. Now, here's the key. Instead of just getting up when I'm done practicing and putting all that music back, I take all the music that I've worked on and I put it at the back of the pile so that when I sit down to practice the next day, the thing that's in front of me is the thing that I didn't get to on the first day. So that way, over the course of 2 days or maybe even 3 days, I get to everything I need to get to. But I just don't have to get to it all in one day. So I keep that rotation going. Sometimes I use Post-it notes to help me with this, but I find that if I just take the music that I've done and put it at the back of the pile, eventually those pieces that have been hiding at the back of the pile come to the front, and I get those done too. You might also combine this system with, if you have a particular urgent priority, like, okay, well, I want to get this piece done and I need extra work on this piece. Well, maybe that one lives outside the pile and you do that one every day and then rotate through everything else. So that's sort of a variation on that system, but it's very effective and it's a very efficient way to use your time, and you never feel bad about neglecting anything because you'll get to it tomorrow if you didn't get to it today. And then the third thing is concentrate. Well, I don't mean to concentrate on what you're doing, although that's always a good idea. But in this particular system, I would pick a day and use that as a concentration day. Okay, I've been putting off that orchestra part and I know I need to work on it. So today's practice is going to be just on that. I mean, maybe I'll do a little warm up, but I'm going to spend my entire practice session on that piece until I feel I've practiced it enough. And then if I have time for anything else, I'll put a couple of other things at the end. But it's just going to be a concentration day. Boom. I'm going to knock out the hardest part of the work on that piece, and then it'll go back in the rotation with everything else after that. So a concentration day can be very helpful. So there are 3 ideas for prioritizing your practice, especially when you have too much to do. Now, if your fatal mistake was pinpoint perfectionism, guess what? That's also a priorities issue, because you really need to, at this point, if you're, sort of laser focusing, going down that black hole, you need to step back and you need to get perspective so that you can really remind yourself what it is you're trying to do. Because chances are the world isn't going to come to an end if you don't have your elbow up, or if you're not closing your fingers, or if that one measure isn't flawless. Because music is a bigger picture than that. And you're there to play music, not to fix one thing forever and ever. So let's step back, look at the bigger picture, and think about this for a second. Music isn't measured by mistakes, right? When you play an entire piece, nobody, except maybe you, is sitting there and counting up the mistakes you've made. Because that's not what it's about. Granted, I'm not encouraging you to have a mediocre performance or to use this as an excuse to do less than your best. But you do have to be realistic about the fact that, a flaw, an error here or there is not going to ruin most performances. Now, if you're playing at Carnegie Hall, I take everything back that I just said. If you're doing a really serious competition, pay no attention to this. You need to get those mistakes out of there. But for the rest of us, the rest of the time, a mistake or two isn't going to be a big deal unless you make it a big deal. Your priority should be playing the music, not just practicing the music, right? We're there to play. Practice is the means to an end, not an end in itself. And believe it or not, those errors that you're working so hard to fix, they will work themselves out over time. So that once you ease up on them, back off a little bit, and start working from that bigger perspective, those errors will start working themselves out. They just may need some time and space in which to do it. So, chill out a little bit. All right, and now, our third mistake. If you need a plan for growth, well, here's a no-brainer, right? You can use that 90-day plan or anything like it, that 90-day plan that I gave you, because this will help you focus on what you need to do. It will give you one goal and allow you to create a plan to accomplish that goal. Now, an important part of this whole planning process is to make sure that you're developing in those 3 growth areas that I talk about in that plan. Those 3 growth areas are technique, musicianship, and repertoire. Those are the things that you always have to keep developing so that you keep developing as a musician. And you want to be balancing your efforts around that. Now, I'm going to talk more in the next video about how to incorporate those in your practice and the part that they should play in your practice. Once again, don't get so stressed out by trying to do all of them all the time. Working on some of them some of the time and others at another time is enough, right? It comes down to balance again. So we'll talk more about those in the next video. But right now, understand that all 3 of those growth areas will be an important part of any plan that you make for yourself, okay? Now, so let's just quickly review proper practice here. Proper practice is about managing your time, your focus, and priorities, making sure that every time that you practice, you're listening with your teacher's ear, right? So that you're not just kind of mindlessly hammering away at the music and hoping that it gets better, but that you're really thinking about what needs correcting and how to correct it. And that should help keep all of those things, time, focus, and priorities, in balance. Proper practice is about playing the music that you want to play. It's not just about practicing. It's about actually getting to the music. We don't want to get stuck practicing and never getting to the fun part, right? And proper practice is about being the harpist that you want to be, the harpist that you can be. Because it's there. You just have to figure out how to do it. and you don't have to figure it out on your own because I've got this system and it's going to work. So what I'd like you to do right now before you watch the next video is to think about your time and your focus and your priorities and the mistakes you might have been making in those areas in your practice. Think about what you can do to make your practice more directed. Use your time better, focus properly, have the right kind of plan so that you've got some priorities in order for yourself. So think about that, then go ahead and watch the next video. In the next video, we'll be doing step 2 of my system and talking specifically about those growth areas and how they play into your practice. And of course, in the third video, I'll give you that final step and we'll put it all together. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.